Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Sunday School Bonanza, brought to you by This Week in Mormons. We are bringing you a quick, good gospel doctrine preparation in about 10-ish minutes so that you can go in there and have thought about the lesson material and participate more and get more out of your lesson. This will improve gospel doctrine in your entire life experience, so it'll be good. Before we get to the lesson, our host for this lesson, coming back from the dead, so to speak, Brad Lammy is back with us, folks. So let's just have a round of applause for Brad.
Thanks, Jeff. Glad to be back.
Brad has gotten married and since we last saw him, so he's needed a little time to adjust to said lifestyle or whatever. But we're happy to have you here, Brad. Thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Very kind of you. So this lesson is lesson 40. It's called Then Will I Gather Them In. Kind of an interesting lesson, I think, because it focuses exclusively on the gathering of Israel, which I honestly think when I read 3rd Nephi, that's not one of the things I tend to take out of it. I don't ponder a lot about the gathering of Israel when I read 3rd Nephi. You know, I tend to think of the blessings and revelation and institution of the sacrament and the 12 disciples and a lot of other things. I don't know why. This just isn't something that typically pops in my head. So I'm glad we have a lesson all about it. The chapters, this scatters around a bit. We're in 3rd Nephi chapters 16, 20, and 21. I don't know why we skipped 17 through 19, because maybe they were already done. I think they were in the previous lesson, but I'm not sure right now. So getting right into it real quick, some simple questions to answer. We talk about the gathering of Israel. What is Israel? A lot of good questions to go over here. So there will be a number of questions we will try to answer briefly as best as we can. One, why was Israel scattered? Or actually, first, what is the house of Israel? I know this is all very Old Testament-y, but what is the house of Israel? Why was Israel scattered? Who are the Gentiles? What do the Gentiles have to do with the scattering and gathering of Israel? What is the gathering of Israel? What sign has been given to show that the latter-day gathering of Israel has begun? And as members of the church, what are our responsibilities in the gathering of Israel? So there's a number of things here. So I guess we can just dive right in. Simple answer. What is the house of Israel? Anybody? Class? I just want this is a pretty quick part, but
well, you know, as it says both in the manual and also what we learn at church, is the house of Israel, or Israel, is refers to the descendants of Jacob.
Yeah.
Whose name was changed to Israel. And
if you get the correct order of line, we have Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob. And Jacob had how many sons?
12.
Exactly. 12 sons. And they are the ones after whom the various tribes of Israel were named eventually, except you'll notice there's no tribe of Joseph, because that actually split into, correct me if I'm wrong, Ephraim and Manasseh, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So that was that. So in a way, there were 13 tribes, but Ephraim and Manasseh were sort of like a coalition. I don't want to get political with it. But anyways, the 12 tribes, okay? So these were the descendants of these people. These are the 12 tribes. These are those who followed around Moses, all of these things, who settled Canaan, who had all of this land, and they were the children of the covenant. They were promised innumerable blessings that you can read all throughout, particularly the book of Exodus, primarily, I think. A lot of great stuff in there, and they often sin and they err, and this is the problem, and this happens all the time. So this leads us to the next question: why was Israel scattered? We talk about Israel being scattered, but what does that mean? And I'm going to read here in 3rd Nephi chapter 16, real quick, verse 4. It says right here, "And I command you that you shall write these things after I am gone, that if it so be that my people at Jerusalem, they who have seen me and been with me at my ministry, do not ask the Father in my name, that they may receive a knowledge of you by the Holy Ghost, and also of the other tribes whom they know not of, that these sayings which ye shall write shall be kept and shall be manifested unto the Gentiles, that through the fullness of the Gentiles, the remnant of their seed, who shall be scattered forth upon the face of the earth, because of their unbelief, may be brought in, or may be brought to a knowledge of me, their Redeemer." So I think the main reason that they were scattered was simply iniquity. And Israel was scattered, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, in stages, you could say. Initially, the 12 tribes broke up into, there was Israel were the northern tribes, Judah was the southern tribes. Israel went first and was carried away captive into Babylon, I want to say. Judah still hung around for a while, but then even Judah was scattered. And this is what we say, this is what we refer to with the tribes being scattered around the earth. They are gone. They are no longer united, yada, yada, yada. You can correct me if I'm off base on any of this.
What I find very interesting with this, Jeff, is that the blessings of the house of Israel are conditioned upon their faithfulness. and that the falling away, or why Israel was scattered, is because they forgot the teachings of the gospel. They began to incorporate things that were not the gospel into their personal lives.
Yeah.
And as each of us, as we apply these to our own life, is that there are practices or there are things that we're doing that may not be in line or in harmony with the gospel. And sometimes those things are very pointed directly that we should not have or should not do. Other times we learn through experience.
Right.
But the one thing that helps you understand how Israel fell is because they began to accept the teachings of the world in place of the gospel. And when that happens, the Holy Ghost can't be with you. And when that happens, you fall. And when society happens, they lose standing before the Lord. Now, the covenant the Lord had with Israel, with also the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah, the blessings split. And the blessings in the relationship he had with them, he could not protect them from the acts of sin or the consequences from it. And that's why they were scattered. And so
I think that segues us nicely into understanding, you said, the influence of the world, which in this case was often the Gentiles, of course. And I think the Gentiles simply said were those who were not born into the house of Israel or those without the gospel. And that carried away all over into the ministry of Christ. And it wasn't until after the resurrection when Christ told his disciples, led by Peter, to bring the gospel unto the Gentiles. And this referred to the Romans, the people all throughout the Mediterranean region at that time. But it refers to anybody without the gospel. And I think in that sense, the Gentiles had a lot to do with the scattering of Israel because, like you said, they slowly adopted false practices. They reveled in various forms of iniquity and things that the Lord had not instructed them to do.
They did not keep the doctrine pure, and that's basically what led to their fall. So
exactly. So I think that's the main gist of it. So I don't know, Brad, maybe you can take us through this next part. Like, what is the gathering of Israel? What does that entail?
Okay. The gathering of Israel is very interesting. And 3 Nephi chapter 16, verses 4 and 12, it states, "And I command you that you shall write these things after I am gone," as you already mentioned. And as you look at the scriptures, why are these things written? They're written to show people that the gathered of Israel is going to return. We had the Book of Mormon is to gather in Israel, and this is a prophecy both within itself, as the Book of Mormon exists, to indicate to the readers that this is what I'm doing with this book and also with the restored gospel. And as the missionary work started from the Restoration, different parts of the world have clung to the gospel at different speeds. But more than anything else is that those who will listen to his voice and know his spirit are those who choose to become Israel and go from being either not the spiritual lineage of Israel, of Gentiles, to Israel, or they become his lineage or adopted in.
Yeah, we're adopted in. Yeah.
And that is that gathering of Israel, is when people choose to listen to the Spirit and act upon it. And the Lord is willing to give all the blessings that he gave to Israel to those who will hear his voice and act upon it. And what I find interesting with the quote, it says from President Spencer W. Kimball explained that the gathering of Israel is effected when the people from faraway countries accept the gospel and remain in their native lands. The gathering of Israel for Mexicans is in Mexico, in Scandinavia for those in the northern countries. The gathering place for Germans is in Germany and in Polynesia and the islands. It's a very interesting point, is that the gathering of Israel does not necessarily mean you're all going to gather to the same place. So you're going to gather together as a nation with the gospel, and so that the blessings of the gospel can bless that nation. Instead of just being one location, it is wherever you are. And it's a very interesting theme that you find with the gathering of Israel.
And I think it's interesting that President Kimball noted that, because previously the instruction was the gathering of Israel very literally meant, during the early days of the church, wherever you came from, to drop what you had, to move to Zion and establish its base there. And then slowly there was this shift. I think, was it President McKay when it became more of a formal policy shift?
Yes.
I think, but before that time, people were probably settling in more into their native lands. But I believe it was under President McKay when he finally said, yeah, you're welcome to come to Utah if that's your deal, but we are not calling for all of the converts in the church to gather in this one place anymore. Build Zion at home, which is basically what was needed. And I like that you made the point. The point now that we gather as Israel is unifying ourselves as members of the church.
Well, to me, this also brings up the allegory of Zenos. And at the last final gathering of the vineyard, all the parts of the vineyard, both the hidden parts and the parts that are good and bad, they are all gathered up together. So they're not, in that allegory, it's not just one place, it's several different vineyards. And that's what you see here at the last part of the gathering of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Actually, we'll skip down a little bit, but there's a very good point here. We discuss what happens to Gentiles, what happens to everyone who repents and turns to God. President Joseph Fielding Smith said, "Every person who embraces the gospel becomes of the house of Israel." In other words, they become members of the chosen lineage, or Abraham's children through Isaac and Jacob, unto whom the promises were made. The great majority of those who become members of the church are literal descendants of Abraham through Ephraim, son of Joseph. Those who are not literal descendants of Abraham and Israel must become such, and when they are baptized and confirmed, they are grafted into the tree and are entitled to all the rights and privileges as heirs. Grafting. Great that you brought up Zenos. Yeah, it's brilliant. So I think we see this in our latter days. What can we do, obviously, to bring about the gathering of Israel? What promises do we see? How do we see this being fulfilled? Personally, I think it's the very real fact that we have the scriptures to teach us the words of the prophets, and that we have missionary work to bring this to pass and to live these good lives as disciples of Christ.
What I find a very great blessing is the invitation for all people to come unto Christ. And the Lord extends his blessings to all. It is through the Abrahamic covenant, which is a part of the priesthood, that through his seed, that all the nations of the earth be blessed. And you see that when as the gospel is then restored, and that gathering happens, all nations are being blessed with the seed of Abraham. And that is also through, as it said in your last quote, through the seed of Abraham, through the seed of Ephraim, with the restoration of the gospel, and all are partakers of the heavenly gift here on earth.
Yeah, I like it. So this is kind of the gist of the lesson, really, this notion of our responsibility to ensure that the gathering of Israel continues, that it pushes forward unabated, you could say. We have a great responsibility to invite all to come unto Christ and to be grafted into the house of Israel. And, of course, Christ prophesied all of this in these chapters specifically. He also made a specific promise to the Nephites. It's interesting that they would be given the land of the Americas as their inheritance, which is very interesting when you think of inheritance, because I think of those same along lines of Israel. They were given this, but what responsibilities accompany it? We learn especially in Ether that they had to be a righteous people. They had to serve God. And I think there are really interesting parallels there, because the Nephites eventually turned on their Lord, and what happened to them? They were also effectively scattered, in a sense, within their own subset of people, much like Israel over in the Levant. And so we see this all the time. We're given great promises by our Heavenly Father, but if we fail, then he is bound by his own law to withhold those blessings from us.
And the reason for that is because where Zion is to be of one heart and one mind, and when you're not as one, the Lord cannot bless you.
Yeah.
Because you listen to his spirit, and you essentially listen to his voice and are ruled by what he desires you to do in humility and in faith.
Well, there it is. Great lesson, great stuff to think about, and it makes me want to bone up more on my Old Testament stuff, which is a great read. We don't give it enough credit, I think, sometimes in the church. Of course, you can find us at thisweekinmormons.com. Listen for our regular weekly podcast, This Week in Mormons. Find us on Facebook.com/ThisWeekInMormons and at The Real Twim on Twitter. And, of course, you can find us on YouTube as well at TWI Mormons, Twim Mormons. Brad, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Pleasure to have you, my friend. This has been, of course, Lesson 40, Then Will I Gather Them In, from the Book of Mormon Gospel Doctrine Manual. And this has been Sunday School Bonanza, wishing you a happy and fulfilling Sunday. Bye-bye.